Okay, so with the recent return of the Sledge being available via this alert, I was under the misconception that this weapon just wasn't good and kind of just people would get it for the sake of mastery. But after acquiring this thing, which by the way at the moment of uploading this video it's probably only going to be here for a few more days, I am pleasantly surprised by this thing's performance. But it is not the only focus of today's video, as we will be combining with the start of the show today, which is Vault. Vault is of course our electricity themed Warframe, and with the Sledge throwing mechanic, I realised that the combination of the two kind of reminds me a lot of Stormbreaker from the Avenger movies. For anyone unaware, it's basically kind of like a second version of Thor's hammer, except it's a giant axe. And even though the Sledge is a hammer, it looks a lot like the Stormbreaker does. The combination of the Sledge and Vault has become one of my favourite loadouts to use recently, which says a lot because Vault is a Warframe which I frequent a lot, with plenty of builds you can try on him and weapon combinations. He's just so fun all around. But this one really stands out to me. Now we've got a couple of iterations of the build, both achieving a similar thing in a different fashion. One of them a bit more bog standard and what you'd expect from a setup like this, and one that's maybe a little higher investment but a bit more unique and arguably more fun. Anyway, let's get into the nitty-gritty details and break out the combination. The Sledge is a unique hammer with a throwing mechanic where if you just hold down its primary attack, it will throw out the hammer. So in order to pull off the combos, you actually have to spam, or I guess tap away at your combos as opposed to holding them like you probably would normally. It's a little bit jank in its mechanics, I'll be honest, and I don't like the fact that it's not done via a heavy attack. That's because the heavy attack slot is reserved for when you throw out the hammer, as your heavy attack button will detonate the hammer once it is in the air. The explosion is incredibly powerful, but isn't 100% necessary for every attack. The throws are rather good, especially when we combine this with the obvious melee influence. However, I'd still recommend using the combinations in order to build up your combo count, but do be aware if you detonate the hammer once it's thrown with the heavy attack, it will deplete your combo count unless you do it once you have Techrot active. So you build up your combo with a few swings of the hammer and then just throw the hammer, and only heavy attack explode the weapon whenever it really feels necessary, I guess, upon a bigger horde of enemies and you have the symbol for Techrot on your screen. Otherwise you're just going to lose all of your combo. At first I wasn't really sold on this weapon, but I promise you it is 100% worth having right now. So if you've gotten it with its recent return, even outside of the Vault combination, this is going to be a weapon you want to try. And then in order to turn this thing to Stormbreaker, we are using Vault with his shocking speed augment. Now, as far as I'm aware, Vault's passive seems to actually trigger melee influence without the use of shocking speed. Vault's passive builds up an electrical damage charge for his next attack as he is moving. So I'm pretty certain that if you just walk around a little bit and then throw the axe, you'll have a guaranteed electric status proc, thus proccing influence. Okay, so Intermission editing Guapi here. Just want to clarify a few things. First off, the passive does absolutely work with proccing influence. You don't need Shock Trooper, but it's nice to use anyway. And it's not guaranteed to proc electricity either. I did say guaranteed, that's not true. At the end of the day, it's still competing with the other elements that you are using. But yeah, Vault can just trigger influence via his passive as long as you are on the move. And also, there's an augment we need to talk about, which is one of the most underrated in the game, and honestly is a perfect replacement for Shock Trooper if you don't want to use it. May even be a little bit better in this particular loadout, and that is Transistor Shield. This augment has been slept on for so long, and what it does, it basically just turns your passive into a far more applicable form of damage. Not only does it allow your teammates to pick up your electric shields, but any damage done to your shields will charge up your passive. So taking like a single bullet from a still path enemy to your Transistor Shield is going to max out your overall damage buff from your passive, imbuing your next attack with a shit ton of damage. And because we're on a slow attack speed setup with just throwing a hammer every few seconds, this is always going to be maxed out. I just figured I'd talk about this because it's a really good augment. You don't need Shock Trooper. Transistor Shield is arguably just as good, if not better in some instances, and I'm definitely going to be using it going forward for this particular setup. This is incredibly convenient, but let's be honest, Shocking Speed is such a good mod, we're going to throw it in the build anyway. This also means we don't have to mod our Sledge for electricity to proc the Arcane. Just hold down your shot cast and then you have a huge electricity damage buff. Vault speed will also increase the speed in which you attack, thus making your throws a little bit faster. This is really nice and you'll definitely feel it whenever your speed isn't active. Throwing weapons aren't really known for being fast. Capacitance is being subsumed off today, and the first option for a subsume we're going to be looking at for the synergy is a more basic and obvious one, that being Raffle Advance, a convenient teleport granting you a huge melee critical damage bonus. I will say this isn't really necessary at all. Already the combination of just Volt, his passive, and the Wolf Sledge with a solid build is more than enough to kill most enemies in the game in Still Path, but obviously we need to go a bit overboard. You guys get the deal. It's a melee build focused around influence, speed, imbuing yourself with electricity, and then just nuking hordes with a throwable hammer. This is literally Thor's Stormbreaker reincarnated in game. When it comes for the Wolf Sledge build, I'm actually opting for gas. Because we have space for more elements, because we don't have to mod for electricity, I feel like gas is a really good option to combine with the fact that it's already doing blast on its radial explosions. And then if you feel like putting viral in here, then you could just equip a Panzervolver Violet as your companion. But another good option would also be the Nautilus for its grouping. We've got a lot of strength on the Volt build, as well as our survivability being focused around shield regen, a bunch of duration so you don't have to spam our abilities too much. Equilibrium is also optional in terms of your sustain. I find Equilibrium is a nice combination of survivability and energy resources, because if I do take damage to my HP, having that health available is good, but you could replace this for something like Prime Flow or Energy Nexus. The duration's so high on this build, you're not going to have to worry too much about your energy pool anyway. And that's that for the first setup. Very simple, so much fun, and I highly recommend you give this a go. But what if you want something that's a little bit more unique and not as simple as throwing on Raffle Advance? We're now going to talk about an Arcane, which admittedly you guys didn't really love the inclusion of in my recent Wukong video, and that's because this is a pain in the ass to obtain. The newly added Arcane Hotshot can only be acquired once a week. So in order to get a max set, you're going to have to wait a really long time to get one of these, and they aren't cheap to buy from people as well because of that time limit. Arcane Hotshot on max rank will grant you 300% bonus crit chance on your weapons after proccing enemies with fire from abilities. This is subbing in for Raffle Advance crit bonus this time, but of course we need an ability that's going to proc fire. There are plenty of options for this. Nullstar would be a great option, but you do require the Nullstar augment in order to make it proc that fire. But because we're using a speedster, why not make him go even faster and combine him with Firewalker? Firewalker gives a small sprint speed bonus as well as leaving a trail of fire behind you. It's duration based, really good for CC and overall decent damage over time and stripping enemies armor with that heat. But of course we're mainly using this so we can proc the Arcane Hotshot. This does require even more of an active playstyle, strategically placing where you run and put your trail of fire around you, so that way where enemies are coming through in terms of choke points, they're going to stand on top of your fire, keeping Hotshot up for a long duration. As I said, Hotshot is a pain in the ass to obtain, and it is a higher investment than just putting on Raffle Advance. But I think this build is overall a bit more active and fun to use, and it's something a little different. Firewalker isn't the best ability in the game, but the combination of the two is a really fun synergy, and because I do feel like something like Prime Sure-Footed is really kind of necessary on Volt, it always hurts to have to rock that instead of throwing on Rush, because Volt speed doesn't feel too fast without the inclusion of a sprint speed mod such as Rush, so having a little bit of bonus sprint speed from Firewalker is a really nice synergy. The main difference in the Volt build is the fact that we got a little bit more shield regen for survivability, and we're not using Arcane Fury because we're squeezing in Hotshot. This build overall does have a little bit less damage, but the survivability is better. It's a small but fun trade-off, and I think you should try it if you're not really looking to use the same old helmet options within each build. And finally, as for other notable things inside the setup, for my focus school I'm using Naramon, so that way I never really lose my combo count, because sometimes I may accidentally detonate the explosion with that heavy attack when my Tenokite isn't active, so Naramon's just nice to have so I can constantly keep my combo up. As for companions, I was mostly using a Nautilus with this build, specifically throwing on Synth Deconstruct to synergize with Equilibrium, but this is just going to group up enemies, make killing hordes with the explosion much more consistent, and also does a bunch of damage with its weapon. But a Panzervolver Violet is also a good option because we're not doing viral. Our hammer was usually being built for gas, of course, so if you want to debuff enemies with viral, the Panzer's probably a better option. And then for Volt, I actually don't have any Arcane Shards installed on him, mainly because they just don't really feel necessary, but if I ever get enough to spare, I'd probably choose to either throw on Amber Shards for maybe casting speed, but particle velocity seems like something I'd go with on him. Mainly because I like how fast he is, but sometimes I want to be a bit quicker. And in the same vein, red Arcane Shards for the bonus strength to help speed would probably be at the top of my list for shards to prioritize. And that concludes the Stormbreaker Volt setup. If you guys enjoyed the video or found it useful, let me know in the comment section down below. I highly recommend you try this setup, especially while this weapon is still available. It is incredibly fun. Subscribe if you enjoyed, if not then no worries. I appreciate all support on the videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.